The reluctant man too good at killing Alvin York. When the United States entered the First World War, many jumped at the opportunity to join the fighting. Others, however, were sent to the trenches. Of these reluctant warriors, some would rise to the occasion and become war heroes, in spite of their hesitancy to fight. Perhaps the most famous American who served in the Great War was one of these men. Alvin Cullum York was born on December 13, 1887, in Pall Mall, Tennessee, the third of 11 children. His family was impoverished, and York only had 9 months of total formal schooling before working as a laborer and blacksmith to support his family. In order to put food on the table, he was also an avid hunter, a skill that would serve him well in the future. York also had a wild streak, which included frequent run-ins with the law. By 1915, however, he turned aside from his hedonistic ways and became a member of the Church of Christ in Christian Union. After his conversion, York became a devout follower of his new faith and became a respected member of the church community. In 1917, the United States joined the First World War, which had been raging for 3 years. In order to fill the ranks quickly, the government instituted a draft, and on June 5, 1917, York received his conscription notification. Due to the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," York claimed conscientious objector status. This request was denied 3 times, and York was officially inducted into the U.S. Army. York was sent to Camp Gordon, Georgia for training, and was attached to the 328th Infantry Regiment, 82nd Infantry Division, nicknamed the All-American, since it had members from all the 48 states at that time. Throughout his time in training, York proved himself a capable soldier and an excellent marksman, though he still couldn't reconcile his beliefs with the duties of a soldier. He brought his concerns to Major Edward Buxton, his battalion commander. Rather than dismiss York, Buxton engaged in an hours-long debate, both men pointing to Scripture, supporting their views. York focusing on passages about turning the other cheek, and other passages advocating nonviolence, while Buxton quoted verses supporting combat, selling one's cloak to buy a sword, and obedience to earthly authorities. York left the meeting still committed to his pacifism, but gave serious consideration to Buxton's arguments. While on leave, he prayed and fasted for guidance, and became convinced that he should do his duty and fight, regardless of his own personal misgivings. With a clear conscience, York and the 82nd Division were sent to France. Most notably, York participated in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, which began on September 26, 1918, the largest single campaign ever conducted by the U.S. military, with over 1 million men participating over the course of the 47-day fight. After years of fighting, the Germans were highly experienced and built an elaborate network of defenses to hold the ground they had taken. The inexperienced Americans threw themselves into the meat grinder, and their attacks stalled out. On October 8, members of the 2nd Battalion, 328th Regiment, 82nd Infantry Division, including newly promoted Corporal Alvin York, were sent to reinforce positions at Hill 223. Pushing against heavily entrenched Germans. They managed to force the Germans off of the hill, but to continue the advance, they would have to enter a steep valley with no discernible cover. To complicate matters further, the Americans on the left and right flanks were stalled out by stubborn resistance, leaving the battalion to advance alone. If that wasn't enough, the battalion was advancing to the northwest, though earlier that morning orders were changed, and they were supposed to attack due west. The runner carrying the order was killed before delivering the message, leaving the unit unsupported. York's platoon began their attack against the German lines, led by Lieutenant Kirby Stewart. As they reached the center of the valley, Stewart was hit by a burst of machine gun fire and killed, turning command over to Sergeant Harry Parsons. Parsons noted that on the left of their advance were German machine gun positions and ordered 17 men, including Corporal Alvin York, to silence them. Making their way around the German positions, they stumbled upon elements of the Prussian 210th Reserve Infantry Regiment, which had been moved up as reinforcements. The Germans were resting after a forced march the night before and had set their weapons aside when confronted by the Americans. Caught off guard, the Germans surrendered. On a nearby hill, German machine gunners noticed what was happening and swung their weapons towards the Americans. They shouted for their countrymen to get down before unleashing a torrent of fire on the hitting both the doughboys as well as their fellow Germans. Of the 17 Americans, 6 were killed outright, and 3 were wounded. While some of the remaining troops guarded the PLUs, York was now the senior NCO of the remaining 8 that were capable of putting up resistance. York advanced to a better position, about 50 yards from the Germans. Laying prone, York began to fire into the German machine gun crew and supporting riflemen. There is some controversy as to what rifle York used. Some suggest that he was armed with a Springfield 1903, chambered in .36. Even his statue in Nashville, Tennessee, depicts him wielding this firearm. It was more likely, however, that he used a 1917 Enfield, a version of the British pattern 14 Enfield, which was modified to fire the .36 cartridge. These had been made by American firearm manufacturers for years, for use by the British, and it was easier to convert these for American ammunition than to make enough 19.3s. Regardless of the type of rifle he wielded, he did so with devastating effect. Years of hunting experience made York adept under pressure, and he eliminated the machine gun crew and a number of riflemen with methodical efficiency. All the while, York repeatedly called out to the Germans to surrender, so he would not be forced to take any more lives. With the machine gun silenced, York made his way back downhill. As he walked, a group of Germans spotted him and launched a bayonet attack. York dropped his now empty rifle and drew his pistol, a Colt 1911. He stopped next to Private Percy Beardsley, the unit's shotgunner, who also drew his Colt and began firing on the charging Germans. Drawing on his knowledge gleaned from hunting turkeys, York aimed for the rearmost German first, the idea being that if the leader was dropped, the others would scatter and be more difficult to eliminate. Working his way from the back to the front, he methodically picked off the attackers one at a time, supported by Beardsley. Some of the Germans fell back in the confusion, but one by one they fell, until the 6th was less than 10 feet away when hit. After seeing his countrymen being killed, a German officer among the PLUs who spoke English approached York, and after a brief exchange said that he could get the remaining Germans to surrender. York agreed, and the officer blew a whistle and began shouting orders. York used him to translate instructions, and soon he, his surviving men, and a column of German PLUs were on their way back to American lines. The group eventually arrived at a rear area when an officer approached York stating, "Well, York, I hear you've captured the whole German army." York replied, "No, sir, I only have 132. During his action in silencing the machine gun and stopping the bayonet attack, York killed 25 German soldiers. Due to this feat, York was promoted to sergeant and was given the Distinguished Service Cross. In April of 1919, a review of his actions had this award upgraded to the Medal of Honor. He would also be awarded the French Quadriguer and several other foreign medals. After the war, York returned home to Tennessee and tried to reintegrate into the life that he had left behind. He did use his fame for charitable works, most of which focused on improving the lives of the residents of impoverished Appalachia. During the Second World War, York joined the U.S. Army Signal Corps as a major, though health complications prevented him from participating in any significant capacity. York would suffer a stroke in 1954, and the remaining decade of his life in failing health, passing away on September 2, 1964. Though hesitant to stay in the limelight, York did agree to have his tale told in a film. In 1941, Sergeant York was released in theaters, starring Hollywood legend Gary Cooper in the title role. One of the top-grossing movies of the era, and a film that would cement Alvin York's name in history. We upload all the videos that we have to censor from YouTube to our Patreon. Right now, you can watch uncensored videos on the Battle of Cantian, medieval warfare, and the Sherman tank, all on Patreon. History is epic. Watch it uncensored.